This episode contains discussions of child abuse. If this raises any issues for you, support is available through the links and phone numbers in the show notes.
Welcome to First Things First. I'm Brooke Blurt, my pronouns are she and her.
I'm Maddie Mills, my pronouns are he and him, and before we get started, we'd like to acknowledge the custodians of the land on which we record. And for me and Brooke today, it's the Gadigal People of the Eora Nation.
Yes, we've got an exciting guest coming up, Lucille Shackleton, who is a lot of things, which we'll jump into. Let's go.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your job, your profession, who you are, where you're from. We always say who's your mom, where's you from, but like...
Yeah. Lucille, she, her pronouns. I grew up in Sydney and I've kind of done a range of different things. I got into relationship therapy and sex therapy, in all honesty, because of my own experiences. It's an area of interest for me. And, you know, when I was younger, I had challenges. Well, I mean, we all have challenges in relationships, but it really kind of was born out of that desire to understand my own challenges in relationships. So I started by studying a Bachelor of Behavioural Science. I went on to study counselling, public health, and then did sexology or psychosexual therapy. So I now kind of specialise in relationships and in sex therapy. And yeah, I help people improve their relationships, dating, and their sex lives.
Can I ask, what is sexology?
Sexology is the study of sex, sexuality, sexual experiences, your relationship with yourself as a sexual being. So it's everything around sex, intimacy, and your experiences as a sexual or erotic being. So it covers sexual health, it covers intimacy. Yeah. It's kind of a really broad area. So when someone says that they're a sexologist, usually they have some sort of formal training in sex, gender, sexuality, intimacy, and those sorts of areas. And often that kind of filters through to relationships. But one of the reasons I kind of say that I specialize in both is because when I started out as a relationship therapist and through working with people, and, you know, sex often comes into the sessions when you're working with people on their relationships. When I studied all the kind of main frameworks for relationship therapy, there was very little conversation or teaching about sex. And so I was like, oh, I didn't feel prepared to really navigate that with people. I was like, why don't I know this if I've studied all this stuff? Yeah. And so I went and got a master's in sexology or psychosexual therapy to kind of give me more skills and tools to help people.
It's not really taught a lot in high school. I mean, my very, very little sex education was coming from a sealed section in a Cosmopolitan magazine or a Girlfriend magazine. I don't know if you knew what those, you know, the sealed section, you'd rip it and it'd be like how to give the best blowjob or something like that.
Oh, really? Did that happen?
Yeah, seriously.
They still kind of exist to a degree.
Well, they just come back. So Cosmo's just come back and they've got a sealed section now.
So it's like it's sealed?
So like you can peel. So it's like a sealed little magazine within a magazine and you kind of peel it off and it's got all this sort of like.
Wow.
But that's, for me, I don't think that's really like a healthy way, because like why does it need to be sealed? Like why is it covering up and it's like in this secret and it's like, well,
it's a taboo
I think
topic, right?
it's taboo, and I think like growing up, that was the very little education that I had around sex. I mean, I know that some really awesome advocates around consent. I think Chantel Contos. Do you know her? Yeah, she has put in a lot of consent legislation or fought for that legislation to be in schools, I think, as well. Yeah. I think that's a big improvement around consent personally. What would you say like has been the biggest barrier, I think, you know, in what you've like researched over the time that you've been in relationship and sexologist?
I think if we go with the theme of kind of what you're talking about, and that is sex education.
Yeah.
So I used to work in shelters with teens, and it was really evident to me the lack of information out there. And I think what I've really noticed with young people is that, especially for kids within the queer community, the information that they're getting is very heteronormative. So the most of the education that people are receiving in schools is very heteronormative. So it may not actually be relevant for their relationships or their sexual experiences, which then leads people to access information on the internet. And I think this is the biggest challenge that we have today. It's that young people are accessing a lot of education through things like porn. And that doesn't cover things like consent. It doesn't cover things like safe sex practices and condom use. And it is also, you know, very geared towards certain ways of achieving pleasure. And so I think it's created this very skewed understanding of sex. And I think it really stunts people's development of their sexual self-confidence and embracing themselves and feeling comfortable with them in themselves.
Oh my God. Yeah.
I feel like there's a whole generation of men who just sort of are putting their own needs, I suppose, or their own wants above women, you know, when it comes to sex. When you were doing your master's, was there much like teaching on same sex?
Yeah, I did a subject specifically on sex, gender, and sexuality, and it was amazing.
Okay.
I want to do that.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like I would learn so much more about myself more than like learning about other people's stuff. I'd be like, this case study is me.
It's fascinating because I think what it helps you kind of unpack is just how socially conditioned we all are from the experiences we had growing up around what relationships should look like, what sex should look like. And I think this is one of the big challenges I have with social media. I think social media has a lot of really gendered messages that we see in dating and relationships. And whilst, you know, I think social media is an incredible platform to access information, it's really important to be really discerning around who you're getting that information from.
Yeah, I feel like that's my biggest struggle, I think, working with youth, kind of re-educating them to not trust everything that they're reading, listening to, or watching on TikTok and these other platforms, because I think, you know, they kind of take it for Bible because they have such easy access to it, and it's like, it's terrifying. It's so scary.
Would you say that consent is something that is like a top tier priority when it comes to sexual education in schools, or what do you think is like?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think this is the thing, like, if we think about sex and, you know, people are often focused on like pleasure, how can we have good sex? We can't have good sex unless we feel safe. And we can't feel safe if we don't have consent. And I think consent is a consistent conversation. It is, you know, a question that you ask, but it's also continual in our, you know, learning how to respond to one another, how to tune into one another, how to listen for cues in order to keep kind of having that consistent conversation. And even if that's not verbal all the time, it's, you know, learning to kind of tune into your partner and check in with them and see where they're at. And it's things like aftercare. It's not just like, do you want to do this now? It's also like, how was that for you? You know, how did you feel? How did you experience that?
I love a debrief.
A debrief. And like, you know, what do you need after? Do you want cuddles? Like, what helps you feel close? And I think even just things like that, I think the way that consent is often taught to young people, well, sex in general, I think, is very fear-focused. It's very, like, focused on contraception, you know, safe sex practices, like how to use a condom, all of that sort of stuff. But it's not, like, and I don't know, part of me thinks, like, how could we teach it in a way that's actually going to empower people rather than scare them?
Yeah, agreed.
Because, like, if you think about Sex Education, that TV show, right? Like, it was all about empowering young people to make choices. And, you know, the more information you have and the more confident you feel in yourself, the more you can navigate these difficult conversations around sex.
They don't seem so scary. Yeah,
exactly.
And, like, I remember even in my adult life, like, learning so much stuff about myself and then having the confidence because it wasn't so scary, because I sort of broke that barrier because I'd made me like felt confident enough to say things or ask things, or just, you know, go for it in a way where it's comfortable and consensual. But then it wasn't so scary after that. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. Not to like bring it down or anything like that, but I think my experience with sex were like first times were like non-consensual, and I knew that it was wrong. Like, I guess my first like full transparency, and I'm okay with talking about this because I also am in therapy and I feel like that I've got support. But I was molested when I was younger, and that was a boundary that I didn't even know what boundaries were at that age, and I didn't even know what they were really more into like my early 20s or mid 20s really. But so my first like sexual encounter for pleasure per se was not, I guess, enjoyable either, because I'd sort of had this misconstrued idea of what sex was and what pleasure was, and like I thought that this is kind of fucked up, but I thought it meant to hurt, and that's not okay. And so like pleasure wasn't pleasure for me for a very long time, and it wasn't until like I actually learned more about myself, and I had someone who I felt comfortable enough to communicate and talk to about my needs and my wants later in life, that it all changed for me. And I think that's like a very common thing, I think, for a lot of women, which kind of terrifies me and fucking scares me about it, because I have a different relationship to sex now, but when I was younger, it was a very fucking confusing navigation for me, like hugely. And I think that's probably why I'm so motivated to make sure that I'm saying and doing the right things for other young people, because I feel like a pressure to them, for them to not go through that, but then also to have the confidence and exploration and voice. Voice is a huge thing, to ask the right questions and to have those boundaries, I think. That was an overshare. Apologies.
No, don't apologize.
Sex for me, like, I enjoy it now, but previous to my, I've had my boundaries crossed so many times throughout my life. It's not okay.
I just want to say that I'm sorry that you had that experience. And I think it's incredibly powerful that you share that on a platform like this, because what I can tell you is that I have worked with so many women who struggle to enjoy sex as a result of sexual experiences that they have had where their boundaries have been crossed, where they have been hurt. And I think the more that people's voices are shared, there's so much healing that comes from that. So I just wanted to say thank you for sharing that. And also I'm sorry that that's what you experienced.
Yeah.
I've found a lot of the time that I have shared with other women per se, like they've gone through similar experience, which is actually awful. And then I think of, oh my God, if I'm going through this, you're going through this, have other young people gone through this? And I think that's what I get so terrified for. But I think, I wrote a book a couple of years ago, and one of the biggest challenges for me with writing that book was having the confidence to be like, okay, I'm going to share something really fucking vulnerable. And it's going to be terrifying, but I think it's the right thing to do. I think I need to do this because it's not just for me. It's like, if it's for future women, it's for future people, however they identify. But I think like sharing that, I've had a fuck ton of messages from people who have gone through the similar and are so grateful that I have. And so that kind of keeps me ticking over, I guess, in a way that I feel okay about it. It still sucks sometimes when I think about, I was a child, I was young, it didn't happen just, once, it happened more than a few times, and it was from people close to me and my family. So that's also a fucked thing to think that breaks a barrier within my own family relationships, right? And I'm so glad that I have got the skills and the mentality to sort of overcome that and keep pursuing and keep persisting. But it also it created a little bit of a resentment, I guess, in like an openness to have sex and to have relationships. And I think it's also been part of the biggest barrier I've had with relationships and sex combined, because like you said, they're hand in hand. And I think like the more I learn about myself and the more I sort of don't blame myself and forgive myself and sort of, use it as a fucking superpower sometimes. I'm like, fuck that. It makes me feel a bit better, I guess. It doesn't take the scars away, but I think like it makes them hurt less. I appreciate when people like say that it was a fucking shitty thing. Like I'm like, yeah, it was. And for years I was silent about it.
What does a healthy relationship look like to you? As a therapist who have worked with many different relationships and couples, you know, what does a healthy relationship look like, and what does maybe a healthy conversation look like when it comes to intimacy?
I think for anyone, safety and respect within relationships and sexual relationships is incredibly important, but I think it is so much more important if someone has had any sort of experience where boundaries have been breached. Like creating that safe environment is so essential to build that trust and that foundation in order to really be able to let your walls down, right? And sometimes, depending on our past experiences, I think we all have these ways of protecting ourselves depending on our wounds.
Yeah.
And so we have our individual wounds, we all have our stuff. And then depending on what those wounds are, we will create these kind of parts of ourselves in order to protect ourselves and so sometimes we have these parts that may seem somewhat dysfunctional, but actually usually they're serving a function. It's just that they're serving a protective function. So often it's about, I think a really big part of creating a healthy relationship is reflecting upon what are my patterns and how does my past influence how I show up in relationship and engage with other people.
Patterns,
I love that.
yeah.
Patterns, yeah.
Yeah.
I talk about this with my therapist quite a bit. Like he's a queer man. He's also neurodivergent, but he's he's amazing. Like I love my therapist, and I think that's a really good relationship to have. But I realized like him being gay for me was like he's not a threat.
Yeah.
He doesn't want me. He doesn't want to fuck me. And I know that sounds so stupid and quite like humorous in a fucking stupid way, but that's why I love him, because he's...
See, even that, like, it's such a different experience to what I would have as a cis male, you know?
And it's a pattern I have, because like most of my best close friends are all queer, and I feel safe within that community. I feel safe within that environment, which kind of speaks a lot, and I'm working on that. But then also patterns are like, I don't know, when I first saw him, like he made me like look at all of the relationships I've had, family, and then also romantic, and then my friendships, and how I felt about them. You know, what would they think of me, and like, what do they serve me, like in the relationship, like all these little like questions and cues that I had, and I noticed and that's when you sort of notice the patterns of like my relationships, like and why they ended and why they started, and the intensity of like things, you know, when did they ever cross a boundary, did they ever make you feel like... It was just so interesting, and I think patterns is such a good way of like starting out to notice things. Have you ever done this?
Well, I have. I definitely have patterns and habits that I don't like think are positive in my life. I feel like there are so many like things that I've known. I did when I was doing therapy. When I was in therapy, I was definitely working on breaking a lot of patterns and habits, but also patterns in your partners. You know, knowing that they can become quite predictable, and understanding it's almost like you know what you're going to get. You know what I mean? Because like even with my partner now, I know certain patterns around if we have conflict. I know that he hates a discussion to find resolve quickly. He needs time. And so what I've noticed is every time I've gone in with a solution and gone, we should fix this right now, give me a kiss and cuddle, let's get over this, like trying to fix it straight away, he can't meet me there. Yeah. He needs time. He needs like at least a few hours of us not talking for his emotions to come down, you know?
Yeah, processing time.
I know that about him.
Which we don't really communicate our needs and wants, do we? It's the hardest, that's the thing with, I guess it's such a challenge. Sometimes I don't even know what I want though. Like, I'm like, just give me the time to like figure that out.
I think that it changes in relationship dynamics.
100%.
You know, so like my sexual needs in my past are completely different to what they are now. So it's like almost done like a 360 of the dynamic. So when I was with Paul, everything sexual is completely different to what I have now. And in both moments, I'm experiencing my needs. So it's like it depends, right, on the dynamic.
The dynamic of the relationship influences the sexual dynamic and vice versa. Because I think that's the thing, like we get needs met in different ways, and we will show up differently according to the relationship that we're in. Like I think different relationships bring out different sides of us. And I think it's really key.
Well, when I'm with a woman, I'm different when I'm with a man.
Yeah.
I love being with a woman. I think it's a very comfortable. Like it's very like I feel safe. And with a man, I'm like, oh, like let's just like it's a bit clunkier. It's a bit like
I actually remember having a moment with my partner where I was like, I think that I get a different version of you than your ex got, and you get a different version of me than my ex got. And like us coming to the realization that we are both like really good versions of ourselves in this relationship, when in our past we might have been like hiding parts of ourselves or trying to be something else to please the other person. Like I definitely know that was my experience. So like I can definitely tell, you know, when people say, oh, your partner should bring out the best in you. I feel like this relationship is the first one that like we've both sort of met there. Yeah.
I think so. Like I've seen a huge shift in the last like year or so. Like I want to talk about dating apps. Like I find it's just so transactional sometimes. Do you feel like the access that we have like through dating apps is not a problem, but do you think it's like causing a very like different mindset to how relationships establish, I guess? Like,
look, I think relationships are really helpful in that they allow us to connect with one another and they allow us to connect with people that we might not have previously been able to connect with. But I think the way that they've been set up, they're not actually set up in order to help you determine whether you can create a healthy relationship with someone. So I'm a big believer in healthy relationships being a co-creation. You create them together by the way that you show up, by the way that you engage, by the way you speak to one another. Like it's something that you choose moment by moment. And there are certain things that need to be really present in order to create that regardless of the relationship structure you choose. Things like respect, things like kindness, you know, like things like building trust.
Yeah.
And I think the challenge that I have with dating apps, and this is what I hear from a lot of people I work with as well, is that it's really difficult to determine whether someone has these things on a dating app. So you have to get off the dating app in order to actually meet someone and form a connection. But I think the secondary challenge I have with dating apps is I think it's created a bit of a throwaway culture where as soon as people go, oh, this is a little bit hard or this isn't perfect, I'm moving on to the next. And
the grass is greener, there's something shinier.
The grass is greener, there's something shinier. And I think the reality for me is what I would say as a relationship therapist is I remember my first class in like starting to specialize in relationships, the lecturer said to me, no matter who you choose, any relationship will have a certain set of issues that you have to be willing to deal with for the life of the relationship.
You say this
to
me all the time.
And so there's always going to be something, right? Like it's never going to be perfect. You're going to have challenges. You're going to have arguments. But can you respect each other throughout that? Can you hold on to that love? Can you work together to co-create the environment that you want to experience? And so I think the challenge with dating apps is I think people are maybe not as willing to put in the work to create something really wonderful.
Because there's something else.
So
accessible. Like
and
it can be like that.
There's this illusion that it should always be easy. And I think that's one of these messages that we get. It should always be easy.
No, but
like it shouldn't be hard.
No.
Don't get me wrong. It shouldn't be hard.
The reason you asked me that is because of what I said at the start.
That's right. Yeah. We had a big D&M. Yeah. And what you're pretty much saying is what?
You're saying, like, for me, I've always been a relationship person, so I'm someone who likes to, like, really work through stuff. For instance, my previous relationship, 6 years, the last 2 years was me really trying to work through it, like trying to get to a point where I thought, oh, okay, it's either yes or no. Like, and so I'm someone who, like, will make sure that every stone is turned before I give up, you know. Even with my relationship now, we've been together a year and there's been moments where I'm like, oh, should I walk away? But then I find just on the other side of the hardness is the deep conversation that I need to understand him more. And then we get through it, you know. I don't know, there's just something about not giving up and then getting to the other side of that moment that can really create a deeper connection.
100%.
And so for me, those moments of difficulty, I don't throw in the towel. And I'm not saying you throw in the towel. I'm just saying
I do.
But I think that there is a culture out there where it's like too hard basket.
Yeah.
They don't, and I think some people think it's self-preservation. It probably is for some people.
It is for me in moments, but then also there's a thing of like, it's not that, it's not even sometimes a them problem, it's a me problem because, or like.
Do you think the grass is greener on the other side?
No. I know a standard, and I think like of what I want, which I think is I want that. Like I'm not gonna settle.
Yep.
And they're all great people. Like I'm still friends with people that I've dated this year, blah blah blah. But they've said things for like, you know, they've disrespected me and said things like sick and retard, and I don't agree with that language. So it's for me, it's not a matter of like, oh, the grass is greener. It's like, no, you haven't done the work. Those words are offensive. I've communicated that with you. You've said it again. No. Yeah. So those moments have been throughout this year. Like a few of the guys that I've dated have all said those words, and I'm like, guys, we're in 2024. Like, if you haven't done the work for me, like if you're still saying those things, you're not type of person that I want to be with.
Yeah.
Like, it's a progression. It's a value thing.
It's a value thing because it's not really about the word. It's actually about what you think is acceptable.
I agree, and I find it offensive, and I feel offended by it because I've been called that many of times. And I've communicated those things. I've learned to communicate. That's the thing. I'm like, look, and I'm okay with like after the first date being like, look, it didn't really work. Like, let's move on. Like, you were really lovely, great person. And I'm still, like I said, I'm still friends with most of the people I've gone on dates with.
I'm the opposite. I'm such a people pleaser that I'd be like, you know what? Well, like, I think that I'm the opposite end of the spectrum. Like, even if someone probably punched me in the face, I'd be like, well, we can probably get through it. Like, it's stupid, you know?
There was one recent one, though, like, the guy left me in the restaurant and I will never speak to him again. Yeah. Like, that is a total disrespect. That is behavior. Exactly. Yeah. And I just think, you have not done the work. No. You would never do that to your mum or someone else that you respect, so you clearly do not respect me. So, so that's where I draw a line, and it's a hard no and hard out for me.
Authenticity is key, right? Like, you showing up authentically and then being able to go, okay, well, this is who I am. And I think the more authentic we can be in the dating process, the more likely we are to meet someone that's
someone on the same
and like same. When inclusivity is like a core thing for you, like it is for me, like inclusivity is very important to me. If you know, I were to be in an experience where I were with someone that wasn't inclusive, that wasn't aware, that would be a value misalignment. And so it's understanding ourselves better and understanding how we can show up in an authentic way, because the more authentic we can be, the more likely we are to meet someone that's a good match, right?
Exactly.
So it's about knowing yourself. And I think it's also about just
But you have to date, I reckon, too. You have to go out and...
You have to meet people. You have
jump
to...
on that horse.
You do.
You know, I just don't have that experience.
Really?
I've actually never been on one date in my life. Like my whole life. I'm 30 years old.
Yeah.
It's like... I just don't have that experience.
I think it's quite endearing, and I think it's sweet, and I love it. I mean, I've been on 3 dating shows, and I've been on numerous hundreds of dates.
Maybe I should... No, this is just going down the wrong path. I was like, date, but not for like a boyfriend because I'm not in an open relationship. But dating could be fun if you just wanted to like... the experience, but there's no
Can we have you back on again?
Yeah.
Because I feel like I want to, this is like just a part 1, I feel like.
Great.
Because I
would love that. Yeah.
I feel like there's so much more. Because I want to talk about like things like no's and don'ts.
Oh, yeah.
Like
do's and don'ts.
Do's and no's and don'ts? Like no and don't.
No does.
That is consent. Like no.
Yeah, do's and don'ts, green and red flags, all of that jazz.
Please.
Yes.
I just feel like quick fire. I feel like our listeners, if you are listening, I feel like you guys would love it. Like I feel like they would. I think this is like such a common thing with my girl group at the moment as well. Like, well, girl group, but half of them are gays. But we all are feeling like the same vibes.
And I think, look, it is changing across the board, whether you're dating men, whether you're dating women, regardless of who you're dating. You know, I think being a queer woman, I've had various experiences in dating, plus I work in this space. And I think when it comes to relationships and when it comes to sex, there are certain things that transcend gender. There are certain things that transcend sexuality. And these are the things that we really kind of need to talk about. Like, how do you build and sustain healthy connections, healthy sexual relationships? If you're someone that is interested in sex, you know, how can we do that in a way that is really like inclusive and authentic? I wrote a book, which is coming out early next year.
Oh, yes.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
well, let's get you back on in alignment with that. That would be awesome.
Yeah, that'd be great. But like, I did it for this reason, because I think one of the biggest challenges I face is that most of, and I guess this comes back to social media, most of the information on dating I see on social media is very heteronormative. Most of the books on relationships and sex are heteronormative.
Yeah.
And so it can feel very non-inclusive for people within the queer community.
Yeah,
I know
that's not
was
my experience.
For me, I was like reading all these books and like doing my education. And I'm like, I'm not here.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not actually in this.
Can't
I'm not
even see
represented in
myself.
this when I was studying, when I was doing a lot of this stuff. So that was kind of why I decided to write a book that could be inclusive and just focused on skills, tools and strategies for anyone.
Yeah.
100%.
So, yeah, I definitely think maybe
feel
having
the
another
same
conversation
way.
about do's and don'ts or green
I would love
flags
that.
or anything
Yeah.
like. I mean, look, I'm always up for talking about dating, relationships and sex. I do it all day long. It's my favorite thing to do.
I
So
know.
And if
Maybe
people wanted
this
to
is the
connect with
profession.
you,
Yes.
like,
Yes,
how do they do
with-
that?
Yeah.
Instagram.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so it's just my name, Lucille.Shackleton, and I post a lot of just like psychoeducation on there about dating, relationships, sex, and
Amazing.
stuff like that.
Okay.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, I could talk to you all day, every
Okay,
day,
part
honestly.
two, when the book, January?
January.
Great,
Yes,
let's
comes out in
get back
January.
on
Yes.
then.
Okay. And
Yep.
what's the? Can we know the book name? Or
Oh, yeah, it's called All In.
All In. Oh,
All
I
In.
love that.
Yeah.
Love
Um,
that.
yeah.
I love
Well,
that.
thank you so much for your time today. Look, we are getting the
for
wrap
having
up
me.
from our team outside,
yeah.
but that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for listening to First Things First. If you love what you hear, leave us a little rating or a review.
And if you want us to cover anything on the pod, actually, if you want to write in your questions for Lucille, we'll have
Love a
them
good
ready to
question.
go
Yep.
in January. I know that seems like a bit of a while away, but it will go so
It'll be
fast.
quick.
Or we could even, like, I don't know, cover it sooner. Who knows? My handle is at Brooke.Blurton. Lucille is at Lucille.Shackleton. And Maddie's at It's Maddie Mills. And we'll see you on the next episode. Bye.
Thanks.